"Mommy, can we stay for the choir rehearsal? They sounded like angels today." "Not today, Maya. I have to get the early shift at the diner. We'll listen to the radio on the way home, okay?" I never thought a beautiful Sunday morning at Grace Community Church would be the day I'd lose the ability to speak in front of my daughter. Maya had been humming the final hymn all through the service, her small hand swinging mine as we stepped out into the bright warmth of the parking lot. I was exhausted, my feet already aching in my waitress flats, but seeing her smile made the double shifts feel worth it. We were almost to our beat-up sedan when the atmosphere shifted. That's when I heard the heavy click of a car door closing, not the soft sound of a parishioner, but a sharp, aggressive slam. I saw Marcus. He wasn't supposed to be within 3 blocks of us. The judge had been firm, the restraining order was tucked in my glove box, but there he was, leaning against a black SUV with that terrifying, familiar set to his jaw. It was the look that preceded every broken plate, every bruised rib. The look that said he didn't care about God or the law. He only cared about control. Maya saw him too. Her humming stopped instantly, her tiny fingers digging into my palm. "Mommy," she whimpered, her voice trembling. I tried to pivot, tried to steer us back toward the safety of the church doors, but the parking lot was a sea of asphalt and heat. People were nearby, smoothing their Sunday dresses and laughing about brunch plans, totally oblivious to the predator in their midst. They were living in a world of peace. I was back in a world of war. "Carissa, don't you turn your back on me when I'm talking to you." His voice sliced through the Sunday silence like a jagged stone. I kept moving, my heart hammering against my ribs, but he was faster. Before I could reach the handle of my car, his hand clamped onto the back of my neck, spinning me around with such violence that my heels skidded on the gravel. I could smell the stale cigarettes and the unwashed rage on him. "Marcus, please. Not here. Not at the church." I choked out, my eyes darting to Maya, who was frozen in terror. "You think a prayer in a Sunday dress makes you untouchable?" he hissed, his grip tightening until my vision began to blur at the edges. "You think you can just hide behind a piece of paper and keep my property away from me?" The pressure on my windpipe was absolute. I tried to claw at Marcus's fingers, but my hands felt like they were moving through deep water. The world began to tilt, the white stone of the church and the blue Sunday sky bleeding into a hazy, sickening gray. I could hear Maya's screams, high and thin, sounding like they were miles away. Marcus's face was inches from mine, his eyes wild with a terrifying, jagged triumph. He was saying something, cursing, claiming me, spitting words of ownership, but the rushing sound in my ears drowned him out. Suddenly, the suffocating weight was gone. It wasn't a slow release. It was as if a bolt of lightning had struck the space between us. I collapsed to the pavement, gasping, the air burning my throat like swallowed glass. Through a blur of tears, I saw a figure standing between me and the man who wanted me dead. He was tall, his silhouette sharp against the midday sun. He didn't look like he belonged in a church parking lot or a street fight. He wore a dark, tailored suit that fit him with mathematical precision, his dark hair slicked back without a single strand out of place. He stood with a calm that was almost unnatural, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. "Step back," the stranger said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a resonant, metallic edge that made Marcus hesitate for the first time in his life. "Mind your business, man," Marcus roared, his chest heaving. He was twice the stranger's width, a wall of aggressive muscle. "This is between me and my wife. Move, or you're next." The stranger didn't move. Instead, he looked down at his left wrist. With a slow, deliberate grace, he unbuckled a heavy platinum watch. He didn't look hurried. He didn't look afraid. He placed the watch into his pocket with the care of a man putting away a fragile heirloom. That small movement, the removal of the watch, felt like a death sentence. The air around him suddenly felt heavy, charged with a cold, predatory energy. Marcus, blinded by rage and the need to regain his lost dominance, lunged forward with a wide, desperate haymaker. What happened next didn't look like the brawls I'd seen in movies. There was no wasted movement, no shouting, no struggle. The stranger stepped into Marcus's space, his body moving like a shadow. He deflected Marcus's heavy arm with a flick of his wrist, and in the same heartbeat, his palm struck Marcus's chest. The sound was like a car door slamming shut, a dull, hollow thud that stole the air right out of Marcus's lungs. Marcus gasped, doubling over, but the stranger wasn't finished. He moved with a clinical, terrifying efficiency. He caught Marcus's collar, pivoting his hips, and suddenly the man who had been strangling me was airborne. Marcus hit the asphalt with a bone-shaking crack, the impact sending a cloud of dust into the air. Before Marcus could even register the pain, the stranger was over him. He didn't strike him again. He simply placed a polished dress shoe firmly on Marcus's throat, not enough to kill, but enough to communicate that life and death were now a matter of his personal discretion. "You have violated a sanctuary," the stranger said softly, his narrow dark eyes looking down at Marcus with a terrifying lack of emotion. "And you have laid hands on someone who does not belong to you." Marcus flailed, his hands clawing at the stranger's trouser leg, but it was like a child trying to move a mountain. The stranger didn't even wobble. His expression remained composed, his angular jawline set in a mask of icy indifference. He looked less like a man and more like a force of nature that had decided to intervene in the affairs of mortals. "Mommy!" The sound of Maya's voice broke the trance. I scrambled toward her, pulling her small, shaking body into my lap. I held her so tight I feared I might hurt her, but I couldn't stop. My eyes were locked on the man in the suit. He looked over at us. For a fleeting second, the coldness in his eyes flickered, replaced by something deep and unreadable. He withdrew his foot from Marcus's neck and reached into his jacket, pulling out a silk handkerchief. He wiped a microscopic speck of dust from his sleeve, his movements returning to that same elegant, leisurely pace. Marcus lay on the ground, groaning, his spirit broken more than his body. The surrounding crowd, finally shaking off their paralysis, began to murmur. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, a late arrival to a finished battle. The stranger turned fully toward me. He didn't offer a hand. Perhaps he knew I was too terrified of men's hands right now to take it. Instead, he gave a slight, respectful nod of his head. "The police are coming," he said, his voice now smooth and soothing, like velvet over steel. "They will take him. He will not touch you again today." Who are you?" I whispered, my voice coming out as a raspy shadow of itself. He didn't answer immediately. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his watch, and snapped it back onto his wrist. The click of the clasp sounded final. "My name is Na Dongha," he said. As the first blue and red lights began to flash against the white walls of the church, he didn't flee. He stood his ground, a silent, dark-suited sentinel between us and the man who had tried to destroy us. I didn't know then that he was a king in a world of shadows, or that my life had just traded one kind of danger for another. All I knew was that for the first time in 5 years, I could take a full breath of air. The sirens grew louder, their rhythmic wailing finally breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the church parking lot. As the first squad car swerved into the lot, the officer jumped out with a hand on his holster, his eyes darting between the man groaning on the pavement and the stoic figure in the dark suit. Na Dongha didn't flinch. He didn't put his hands up in a panic. He simply stepped to the side, giving the authorities clear access to Marcus while maintaining a protective distance from me and Maya. It was a practiced, cool composure that felt entirely out of place for a witness to a violent crime. The next hour was a blur of flashing lights and repetitive questions. An EMT checked the bruising on my neck, his touch gentle, but I couldn't stop my eyes from wandering back to Dongha. He was speaking to a detective, a man who looked like he'd seen everything but was currently looking at Dongha with an expression of cautious, almost nervous, respect. They didn't speak like a civilian and a cop. They spoke like two professionals negotiating a boundary. "Is he a friend of yours, ma'am?" the officer taking my statement asked, nodding toward Dongha. I've never seen him before today," I rasped. My voice sounded like it belonged to a stranger. "He just stopped it. He saved us." The officer scribbled something in his notebook, his brow furrowed. "Well, you're lucky. That man is Na Dongha." He doesn't usually spend his Sundays breaking up domestic disputes at Grace Community. Who is he? I asked, my heart giving a small, uneasy thud. The officer looked at me, then at Maya, who was finally drifting into a traumatic sleep against my shoulder. He owns half the commercial real estate on the east side. Among other things. Let's just say he's a man with a lot of influence. As they loaded Marcus into the back of the police cruiser, he screamed obscenities at me through the glass, his face contorted with a promise of future vengeance. I felt the familiar cold wave of terror wash over me. A restraining order hadn't stopped him today. A jail cell wouldn't stop him tomorrow. Men like Marcus didn't stop until they were forced to. Once the scene began to clear, Dongha approached me. The sun was lower now, casting long, dramatic shadows across the asphalt. He stopped exactly 3 feet away, respecting the invisible wall of my trauma. The detective has my contact information, he said quietly. He also has a copy of the security footage from the church entrance. Your ex-husband will not be granted bail this time. I have made sure the right people are aware of the severity of his violation. Why? I looked up at him, my natural curly hair matted with sweat and dust. Why did you get involved? Dongha looked toward the church, his sharp jaw tightening. My mother used to say that a church is a place where even the smallest bird should be able to find a nest. To see such a place stained by a coward, it was an offense I could not ignore. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, embossed business card. It was thick, cream-colored, with only a name and a single phone number printed in gold. No address. No job title. You were a waitress at the Silver Spoon, correct? I blinked, startled. How did you know that? I make it my business to know the people in my periphery, he said, his narrow eyes searching mine. Marcus will have friends. Men like him often do. If anyone approaches you, at work, at your home, or here, you call this number, day or night. I looked at the card, then back at his composed, pale face. I don't even know you. I can't afford to owe someone like you a favor. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, not a kind smile, but one of recognition. You have a survivor's instinct, Carissa. That is good. But consider this. I do not collect debts from women and children. I simply find that the world is more orderly when predators are kept in their cages. He didn't wait for a thank you. He turned and walked toward a sleek, black sedan that had pulled up silently behind him. A driver in an identical suit stepped out to open the door. As the car pulled away, I realized I was still clutching the card so hard the corners were digging into my skin. I looked down at Maya. She was safe for now, but the air felt different. The false sanctuary of the church had been shattered, replaced by the heavy, complicated shadow of a man who dealt in a different kind of power. I was no longer just a woman hiding from her past. I was a woman who had caught the eye of the most dangerous man in the city. As I drove home, the golden card sat on my dashboard, catching the light. I told myself I would throw it away. I told myself I didn't need another man controlling my life. But as I pulled into my darkened apartment complex and saw a strange car idling near the entrance, my hand instinctively reached for the card. I wasn't just Carissa the victim anymore. I was Carissa, and I had a phone number that could change the world. The Silver Spoon was the kind of diner where the grease stayed in the air and the coffee was never allowed to go cold. By Tuesday morning, the adrenaline from the church parking lot had soured into a dull, aching exhaustion. Every time the bell above the door chimed, my shoulders hit my ears. I'd spent the last 48 hours jumping at shadows, convinced that Marcus's cousins or his gym buddies were waiting in the stairwell of my apartment. I was balancing a tray of heavy ceramic mugs when the bell rang at 10 a.m. I didn't look up. I couldn't afford to. Table 4 needs more cream, Carissa. My manager, Bill, barked from behind the counter. Then he paused, his voice dropping an octave. And, table 6 just sat down. He's asking for you. I wiped my hands on my apron and turned. My heart did a slow, heavy roll in my chest. Na Dongha was sitting in the corner booth, the one with the cracked vinyl that usually stayed empty because the leg was wobbly. He looked absurdly out of place. In his charcoal suit and crisp white shirt, he looked like a piece of fine jewelry dropped into a junk drawer. He wasn't looking at a menu. He was looking at the front door, his hands folded neatly on the laminate tabletop. "Good morning, Carissa," he said as I approached. His voice was low, cutting through the clatter of silverware and the hum of the industrial toaster. "Mr. Na," I started, keeping my voice professional despite the tremor in my hands. "I didn't expect to see you here. This isn't exactly your scene." "The coffee is passable," he replied, his dark eyes finally shifting to mine. They were as unreadable as they had been on Sunday, but there was a strange, focused intensity in them. "And the vantage point is excellent. I can see the front entrance, the service door, and your car in the lot." I felt a flush of heat crawl up my neck. "You're following me." "I am observing," he corrected smoothly. "I told you Marcus has friends. 2 of them were parked across the street from your apartment last night. They left at 3 a.m. I nearly dropped my notepad. The air in the diner suddenly felt too thin. "They were there? Why didn't you call the police?" Dong Ha leaned back, a cold grace in his movements. "The police would have moved them for an hour. I preferred to let them know that someone was watching them. They won't be back to your home." He didn't explain how he'd sent that message, and I was too afraid to ask. I just stood there, caught between the terror of being hunted and the unsettling realization that I was now under the wing of a man who moved in the same shadows as the predators. "What do you want, Mr. Na?" I whispered. "A black coffee. And for you to breathe," he said. "I will be here for your shift. Go about your work." For the next 6 hours, the silent shield was in effect. It was the strangest shift of my life. Every time a rowdy group of men walked in, they would catch one look at the man in the corner booth, the way he sat, the way his eyes never seemed to blink, the sheer aura of controlled violence radiating from him, and they would suddenly lower their voices. At noon, a man I recognized, one of Marcus's regulars from the bar circuit, pushed through the door. He had his phone out, filming the interior, likely looking for me. He took 3 steps toward the counter before Dong Ha simply stood up. He didn't say a word. He just adjusted the cuff of his shirt, revealing the glint of that platinum watch. The man with the phone froze. His eyes went wide, his face paling to a sickly gray. He didn't even wait to be asked to leave. He turned on his heel and scrambled back out the door so fast he tripped over the curb. Dong Ha sat back down and took a sip of his lukewarm coffee as if nothing had happened. When my shift finally ended, I walked over to his table. I felt a strange mix of resentment and profound relief. "You can't do this every day. I'm trying to move on. I'm trying to be normal." "Normal is a luxury you lost the moment that man put his hands on your throat," Dong Ha said, standing up. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, wrapped sandwich, something clearly not from our kitchen. "You didn't eat lunch. Take this for the ride home." "I don't want your charity," I snapped, though my stomach gave an embarrassing growl. "It is not charity," he said, his voice softening just a fraction. "It is maintenance. You cannot protect your daughter if you are fainting from hunger." He walked me to my car, his eyes scanning the rooftops and the alleyways with the precision of a hawk. He waited until I was locked inside, the engine running, before he turned toward his own vehicle. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. He was still standing there, a dark, solitary figure in the middle of the lot, watching until I was safely out of sight. I looked at the sandwich on the passenger seat and the business card in my cup holder. I was starting to realize that Na Dong Ha didn't just save me in the parking lot. He was weaving himself into the very fabric of my life. And for the first time since I'd left Marcus, I wasn't sure which was more dangerous, the man who wanted to hurt me, or the man who had decided I was his to protect. The silence in my apartment that evening was heavy, broken only by the soft, rhythmic breathing of Maya sleeping in the next room. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the wrapped sandwich Dong Ha had given me. It wasn't just food, it was a message. A week passed, and the pattern continued. Dong Ha was there at the start of my shift and there at the end. He never hovered, never interfered with my tables, and barely spoke unless I initiated it. But his presence acted like a physical barrier between me and the rest of the world. Even the air in the diner felt stiller when he was in the corner booth. On Thursday, the rain was coming down in gray, freezing sheets. The diner was empty except for us. I poured him his 4th cup of black coffee and finally sat down in the seat across from him. You said your mother told you about sanctuaries, I said, my voice barely audible over the rain drumming on the roof. But you didn't say why a man like you spends his time sitting in a diner watching a waitress. Dong-ha looked out the window, his reflection sharp in the dark glass. For the first time, I noticed a faint, jagged scar running along the edge of his jawline, half hidden by his collar. My mother was like you, Carissa, he said, his voice dropping into a low, somber register. She was a woman of faith who believed that kindness could tame a monster. My father was not a man who could be tamed. He was a small man who needed to feel big by making her feel nothing. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. I knew that story. I was living it. He found us at a church once, Dong-ha continued, his gaze still fixed on the window. I was 10 years old. I hid under a pew and watched him drag her out by her hair because dinner had been late. I prayed for a miracle. I prayed for someone, anyone, to walk through those doors and stop him. No one came. He finally turned to look at me. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They were filled with an ancient, simmering grief that made my heart ache. I decided that day that I would never pray for a miracle again. I would become the person who walks through the door. I would become the shadow that the monsters are afraid of. The weight of his confession hung in the air. I realized then that his protection wasn't just about me or Marcus. It was an act of penance. He was saving the woman his mother couldn't be saved from. He was correcting a history that had broken him. I'm not her, Mr. Na, I whispered. And you aren't that boy anymore. I know, he said, reaching across the table. For a second, I thought he would touch my hand, but he stopped just short, his fingers hovering near mine. But the debt remains. You and your daughter. You are the sanctuary I am sworn to protect. It is the only thing I do that makes the rest of my life bearable. I looked at his hand, strong, scarred, and capable of such brutal efficiency, and then at his face. The fear I had felt for him was still there, but it was being crowded out by a strange, blooming sense of trust. He was a dangerous man, yes, but he was a man who had chosen to point that danger away from me. Marcus's brother called the diner today. I admitted, the secret finally spilling out. He said Marcus is getting out on a technicality. Something about the way the restraining order was filed. He said I should start counting my days. Dong-ha's expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw lock. The air in the diner suddenly grew cold again. He didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me it would be okay. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Marcus will not be getting out, he said with a chilling finality. And his brother will not be calling you again. I have been patient, Carissa. I wanted to let the law try its hand. But the law is a blunt instrument. I am a scalpel. He stood up, the chair scraping softly against the floor. Go home. Lock your doors. Do not answer for anyone but me. What are you going to do? I asked, rising with him, my pulse racing. He looked at me, and for the first time, he reached out and tucked a stray curl behind my ear. His touch was as light as a feather, but it sent a jolt through my entire body. I am going to ensure that your Sunday mornings are peaceful again, he said. As he walked out into the rain, I watched his black sedan pull away into the mist. I knew then that the rising action of my life was reaching its peak. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one Na Dong-ha was about to unleash. The following night, the shadow Marcus had cast over my life tried to force its way through my front door. It wasn't Marcus, he was still behind bars, seething, but his brother, Terrence, and another man I didn't recognize. They didn't knock. They pounded on the wood until the frame groaned, their voices muffled but thick with a jagged, drunken bravado. They were shouting about family loyalty and how a stuck-up waitress wasn't going to be the one to keep a black man in a cage. I stood in the hallway, my back pressed against Maya's bedroom door, a kitchen knife trembling in my hand. My breath came in shallow, jagged hitches. I had the business card in my pocket, but my thumb went numb as I tried to swipe my phone screen. Before I could even dial, the shouting outside abruptly stopped. There was no sound of a struggle, no cinematic exchange of blows. There was only a sudden, heavy silence, followed by the low, rhythmic thrum of a high-end engine idling in the parking lot. I crept to the window and peeled back the edge of the curtain. Down in the courtyard, the scene looked like a painting of two different worlds colliding. Terrence and his friend were backed against a brick wall, their aggressive postures withered into something small and fragile. Standing before them were three men in dark suits. They didn't have weapons drawn, but they didn't need them. Their hands were clasped in front of them, their presence as immovable as granite. And then there was Dongha. He was leaning against the hood of his sedan, checking that same platinum watch with a look of mild boredom. He didn't look like a hero, he looked like a judge. He said something to them, his voice too low for me to hear through the glass, and the transformation in Marcus's brother was instantaneous. The man who had been ready to kick my door down moments ago was now nodding frantically, his eyes wide with a primal, bone-deep terror. Without a second glance, the two men scrambled toward their car and peeled out of the lot, their tires screeching in a desperate retreat. Dongha didn't follow them. He looked up at my window. Even through the glass and the darkness, our eyes locked. He didn't wave or smile. He simply tapped his watch, a silent reminder that time had run out for the people who meant me harm. The next morning, I arrived at work to find a bouquet of white lilies on the counter and a local newspaper. On the third page, a small headline caught my eye. Local inmate Marcus Lesh transferred to maximum security following internal investigation. The technicality that was supposed to set him free had vanished. In its place was a mountain of new evidence, illegal gambling debts and recorded threats made from jailhouse phones. Evidence that hadn't existed 48 hours ago. Dongha was in his usual booth, but he wasn't drinking coffee this time. He was waiting for me. "They won't be back, Carissa," he said as I approached. "Terrence has decided to relocate to another city." He realized that the air here didn't agree with him. I sat down, my legs feeling like lead. "What did you do to them?" "I gave them a choice," Dongha said, his voice as smooth as glass. "I showed them the world they live in, and then I showed them the world I own. They were smart enough to see the difference." I looked at the newspaper, then at him. "You're not just a businessman, are you? The police, the jail, Terrence, you move them like pieces on a board." "The world is a chaotic place, Carissa," he said, leaning forward. "Most people spend their lives hoping the chaos won't find them. People like me, we manage the chaos. We ensure it stays where it belongs." He reached across the table and, for the first time, he actually took my hand. His skin was cool, his grip firm and steady. "I told you I was a scalpel. A scalpel removes the rot so the body can heal. You have been in survival mode for so long you've forgotten what it feels like to just exist." "I'm afraid," I whispered, and for the first time, I wasn't talking about Marcus. "I'm afraid of what happens when the person who protects me is more powerful than the thing he's protecting me from." Dongha's eyes softened, a flicker of that human grief I'd seen in the rain returning to his expression. "That is a wise fear. But remember this, the wolf only bites the sheep. He protects the ones he has chosen to bring into his den." He stood up and pulled a set of keys from his pocket, laying them on the table. "My associates have secured a townhouse in a gated community near the university. It is in my name, but the locks are yours. There is a school nearby for Maya with a security detail that looks like playground monitors. You don't have to live in a place where people can pound on your door in the night." "I can't accept that," I said, even as my heart screamed for the safety he was offering. "You can't," he countered. "Not for yourself. For the little girl who had to watch her mother be strangled in a parking lot. Do it for her." I looked at the keys. They felt heavier than the knife I'd held the night before. I was standing at the edge of a transformation, the point of no return. To take those keys was to step out of the light of my normal life and into the deep, protective shadows of Na Dongha. I reached out and curled my fingers around the cold metal. The transition from my cramped apartment to the townhouse was seamless, executed with the quiet, military precision that defined everything Na Dongha touched. I didn't have to pack a single box. A team of professional movers, men who looked like they'd been trained by the Secret Service, arrived on a Saturday morning, and by Saturday evening, Maya and I were standing in a living room that smelled of cedar and expensive linen. For the first time in Maya's life, she had a bedroom with a window that didn't face an alleyway. For the first time, I didn't check the lock on the front door 5 times before bed. I only checked it once, knowing that the heavy oak was reinforced with steel and that a camera system hummed silently above the porch. But safety, I soon learned, came with a new kind of weight. A few weeks into our new life, I was sitting on the patio watching Maya play on a manicured lawn when a black car pulled into the driveway. It wasn't Dongha's usual sedan. A man stepped out, older, with a face like weathered stone and a sharp suit that didn't quite hide the holster at his hip. He handed me a thick envelope. "For Mr. Na," he said, his voice a low rasp. "For the school tuition and the household accounts." I opened it to find a stack of cash and a credit card in my name. My stomach turned. I still have my job at the diner. I don't need this. The man looked at me, his eyes devoid of emotion. "Mr. Na does not want you at the diner anymore, Ms. Lesh. It is an open environment. Too many variables. You will begin your online courses for your nursing degree on Monday. Everything has been paid for." This silent shield had become a golden cage. That night, Dongha visited. He didn't come in with the air of a boyfriend. He entered like a king inspecting his territory. He looked at the nursing textbooks on the counter and then at me. "You're making decisions for me again," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of gratitude and resentment. "You took my job. You took my choice." Dongha walked over to the window, looking out at the quiet, gated street. "I took a target off your back." The diner was a vulnerability. Marcus may be in a cage, but the world is full of men who see a woman alone and think they see an opportunity. I am removing the opportunity. By turning me into a ghost. I challenged. "By making me dependent on you?" He turned, his angular face catching the moonlight. He looked tired, dark circles under his narrow eyes that I hadn't noticed before. "I am not looking for a servant, Carissa. I am looking for a partner who is whole. You cannot be whole while you are scrubbing tables for pennies and jumping every time a bell rings. I am buying you the time to become who you were meant to be before he broke you." He stepped closer, and this time, he didn't stop short. He reached out and cupped my face, his thumb brushing over my cheekbone. The coldness that usually defined him seemed to melt away, leaving behind a raw, desperate kind of honesty. "The cost of my protection is that you must trust me," he whispered. "The cost of my world is that it is dangerous to leave it. But within these walls, you are the only thing that is pure. Don't ask me to let you go back to the mud." I looked at him. This powerful, terrifying man who was haunted by a 10-year-old boy hiding under a church pew. I realized that his need to protect me was his only tether to his own humanity. "Is this what love is to you?" I asked. "Control. It is the only version of love I know," he admitted. "Everything else is just a prayer that goes unanswered." As he left that night, I realized the true cost of my safety. I was no longer a victim of Marcus's violence, but I was now a part of Na Dongha's empire. I was safe, yes, but the higher the walls he built around me, the more I wondered what lay on the other side of them, and if the monsters were still out there, or if I had simply invited the strongest one inside. The final hearing for Marcus's sentencing wasn't held in the warm, wood-paneled courtroom I had imagined. It took place in a sterile, cold room that smelled of industrial cleaner and old paper. I sat on a hard bench, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't wearing my waitress uniform or the comfortable loungewear of my new life. I wore a structured navy suit that Dongha had sent to the house, a suit that felt like armor. Marcus was let in through a side door, shackled at his wrists and ankles. The heavy clink of the chains sent a cold shiver down my spine. He looked smaller than I remembered, his muscular build softened by jail food and a lack of sunlight. But when he turned his head and saw me, the raw, unfiltered malice in his deep-set eyes hadn't changed. He didn't look like a man who had learned a lesson. He looked like a predator waiting for his cage to malfunction. The prosecutor began detailing the violations, the history of abuse, and the recorded threats. But then it was my turn. "The victim has requested to give a statement," the judge announced. I stood up, my legs feeling like they were made of water. I looked at the judge, then at the court reporter, avoiding the burning gaze from the defense table. But as I opened my mouth to speak, the words caught in my bruised throat. The memory of the parking lot, the smell of Marcus's sweat, the fading light, the terror in Maya's eyes, rushed back so vividly I felt like I was suffocating all over again. I faltered, my head bowing. The silence in the room stretched out, heavy and suffocating. Then, I felt a shift in the air. I looked toward the back of the courtroom. The heavy doors had opened just an inch. Standing in the shadows of the vestibule was Na Dongha. He wasn't supposed to be there. The lawyers had warned him his presence might be seen as intimidation. But there he stood, his silhouette sharp and unmistakable. He didn't move. He didn't gesture. He simply raised his left hand, the platinum watch catching a stray beam of light from the high windows. It was the signal, a reminder that I wasn't that woman in the parking lot anymore. I wasn't alone. I took a deep breath, the air finally reaching my lungs. I looked directly at Marcus. For the first time in our decade of history, I didn't look away when he tried to stare me down. For years, I thought my silence was the only thing keeping me alive. I said, my voice starting as a whisper but gaining strength with every word. I thought if I was small enough, quiet enough, invisible enough, you would eventually get tired of breaking me. But I realized that you don't want a wife. You want a victim. And I am resigning from that position. Marcus lunged forward, the chains rattling violently against the table as he snarled a curse at me. The bailiffs were on him in a second, slamming him back into his chair. You're nothing, he screamed, his face contorting. You're still mine. You think that suit makes you someone? You're nothing without me. I didn't flinch. I watched him struggle, and for the first time, I didn't see a monster. I saw a pathetic, broken man shouting at a storm he couldn't control. I am the mother of a daughter who will never have to know the sound of your voice again. I finished, my voice ringing through the room. And that is everything. The judge didn't hesitate. Given the new evidence and the blatant display of aggression in the courtroom, Marcus was sentenced to the maximum, 12 years in a high-security facility, with no possibility of parole for at least 10. As they dragged him out, he was still screaming, his words echoing down the hallway until a heavy door slammed shut, cutting him off mid-shout. I walked out of the courtroom, my chest feeling lighter than it had in years. Dongha was waiting for me at the end of the corridor. He didn't say good job. He didn't celebrate. He simply reached out and took my briefcase, his expression as composed as ever. The car is waiting, he said. Maya is finishing her piano lesson. She asked if we could stop for ice cream on the way home. I looked at him, the man who had traded his own peace to ensure mine. You stayed in the back. You didn't interfere. You didn't need a scalpel today, Carissa, he said, his dark eyes reflecting a quiet pride. You were the one who cut him out of your life. I was just there to make sure no one stopped you. As we walked out into the sunshine, I realized the transformation was complete. The victim impact statement wasn't just for the judge, it was for me. I had found my voice, and though I was still living in the shadow of a mafia boss, I knew now that I wasn't a prisoner in his world. I was the reason he kept the world at bay. The peace we had built was thick and sweet, like a summer fever dream, but it was fragile. I was deep into my nursing studies, and Maya was thriving, her laughter finally losing that sharp edge of nervous checking in she used to do. But I hadn't forgotten the among other things the police officer had mentioned about Na Dongha. It happened on a Tuesday night. Dongha was late for dinner, which was unusual. When the front gate buzzed, I didn't see his sedan on the monitor. Instead, a white van was idling at the curb, and two men I didn't recognize were arguing with the intercom. Panic, cold and familiar, flared in my chest. I reached for the phone to call Dongha, but before I could dial, his car roared onto the street. He didn't just park, he intercepted the van, his tires screeching as he blocked their path. I watched from the darkened window as Dongha stepped out. He wasn't the composed businessman I saw at the dinner table. He didn't remove his watch this time. He didn't have to. The air around him seemed to vibrate with a lethal, suppressed energy. He spoke to the men for less than a minute. His gestures were sharp, his face a mask of terrifying authority. Whatever he said made the men scramble back into the van and disappear into the night. When he finally came inside, he was adjusting his cuffs, his breathing heavy. Who were they? I asked, standing in the kitchen. Business associates who forgot the rules of boundaries, he said, his voice tight. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the blood on his knuckles. Not much, just a smear. but it was enough to remind me that the scalpel sometimes had to cut deep. They came to your house, Dongha. They came to our house. He closed the distance between us, his presence overwhelming the small space of the kitchen. They came because they thought I had grown soft. They thought that because I spend my evenings here, I am no longer watching the borders of my territory. And are you? I whispered. Soft. He reached out, his hand hovering near my neck, mirror imaging the way Marcus had once grabbed me, but where Marcus's hand had been a cage, Dongha's was a shield. He didn't touch me, but I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. I am more dangerous now than I have ever been, he said, his voice a low, dark promise. Because before, I was only protecting an empire. Now, I am protecting a life. They will not come back. I have made the cost of entry too high for anyone to pay. The realization hit me then, a truth as sharp as a blade. Na Dongha's world would always be a world of blood and silk. The silk was the life he gave me, the safety, the education, the quiet nights. The blood was what he had to spill to keep the silk clean. I looked at his bruised knuckles, and then at his eyes. I saw the monster he had become to keep the other monsters away. And for the first time, I didn't pull away. I walked to the sink, wet a cloth with warm water, and took his hand in mine. If you're going to be the shadow, I said softly, cleaning the blood from his skin, then you have to come back into the light eventually. He let out a long, shuddering breath, his forehead dropping to rest against mine. In that moment, the Mafia Boss vanished, leaving only a man who was terrified of losing the only sanctuary he had ever known. Stay with me, Carissa, he murmured, even when the shadow grows long. Stay. I didn't answer with words. I just held his hand, realizing that I wasn't just his project or his penance anymore. I was his anchor, and as long as I held on, he wouldn't drift too far into the dark. 1 year later, the Grace Community Church parking lot was flooded with the same golden Sunday light that had once witnessed my near destruction. But as I stood by the sedan, the same one I'd been trying to reach that day, the air didn't feel heavy with the scent of fear. It smelled of blooming jasmine and the faint, expensive cologne of the man leaning against the car door. I was no longer the woman in the stained waitress uniform. I was months away from my nursing pinning ceremony, my hands steady and my head held high. Maya was skipping toward us, her hair in intricate braids, clutching a Sunday school drawing of a lion and a lamb. She didn't look at the shadows anymore. She looked at Na Dongha, and her face lit up with a pure, uncomplicated joy. Dongha, look what I made, she cried, thrusting the paper toward him. He took the drawing with a gravity that most men reserved for million-dollar contracts. He studied the crayon lines, a genuine, soft smile breaking the habitual stone of his expression. A powerful choice, Maya, he said, his voice warm. The lion protects, and the lamb rests. It is a good balance. He looked up at me, his dark eyes reflecting the quiet life we had built. The blood and silk of his world hadn't disappeared. He was still a man of immense, shadow-wrapped power, but the walls he had built around us had held. Marcus was a fading ghost in a distant cell, and the men who had once pounded on my door were nothing more than a bad memory. We drove to the same park where we had sat during those first uncertain weeks. We sat on the same bench, the wood warm beneath us. I have something for you, Dongha said, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small, velvet box. My heart skipped. I looked at him, searching his face. Dongha, it is not a proposal, he said, his voice dropping to that intimate, velvet register. I know you are still becoming the woman you want to be. I know you need to walk across that graduation stage on your own 2 feet before you belong to anyone else's world. He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant band of rose gold, inset with a single, clear diamond that looked like a drop of morning dew. It is a promise, he continued, sliding the ring onto my finger. A promise that as long as I draw breath, you will never have to wonder if someone is coming to save you. You saved yourself in that courtroom, Carissa. My only job is to ensure you never have to be that strong alone ever again. I looked at the ring, then at Maya, who was spinning in circles on the grass nearby, her laughter ringing out across the park. I remembered the feeling of fingers on my throat, the fading light, and the crushing weight of being property. Then I looked at the man beside me. He was a king of shadows, a man who removed his watch to fight the monsters, and a man who held my hand as if it were the most precious thing in his empire. "You saved us," I said softly, leaning my head against his shoulder. "We saved each other," he replied. I was grabbed by the throat by a man who wanted to destroy me, but I was found by a man who chose to rebuild my entire world. As we walked toward the car, Maya tucked between us, I realized that sanctuary isn't a building with a steeple. It's the hand that holds yours when the world gets dark, and the heart that decides your peace is worth any price.